Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Therapy Stack podcast. Therapy Stack is the first job board exclusively for mental health therapists. For job seekers, Therapy Stack allows you to find unique opportunities at vetted mental health startups, group practices, and clinics. For organizations hiring mental health professionals, Therapy Stack allows you to post your job opening to a network of therapists looking for their next dream job or side gig. I'd like to introduce this week's guest on the Therapy Stack podcast, John Montopoli. John Montopoli is a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. He has been in private practice since 2004 and began a group practice in 2016 in San Francisco called Pacific Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, providing high-quality, evidence-based cognitive behavioral therapy to adult clients. I actually remember back at my previous mental health startup a few years ago, John was one of the first clinicians I pitched in San Francisco. We met up in his Pacific CBT office in Pac Heights, and I pitched him the first version of our product. So John and I go back a little bit. John, I really appreciate you being on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you for inviting me to participate in this interesting new project that you're launching.
Absolutely. And I must ask, do you remember when I was in your office and pitched you? Do you remember how bad the pitch was?
I definitely remember meeting. I don't recall the pitch being
I'm just playing around. Cool, John. Well, thanks again for being on. I think a great place to start would just be telling us a little bit about your background and what led you to the field of mental health.
Sure. So just get started a little bit about myself. I was from Connecticut originally, New Haven, Connecticut. I was the product of an immigrant family, Italian parents who had immigrated to the U.S. prior to my birth. So definitely was dealing with biculturalism, trying to assimilate as much as possible into the culture, while also kind of straddling the traditions, the mindset of my immigrant parents. And
you were born here, John?
I was born here, yes.
Got it.
And so I had a fairly typical upbringing and found myself in college kind of struggling to figure out what I wanted to do, as most young people are also struggling with. And I knew that I liked psychology a lot. Mm-hmm. I took a psychology class in high school and was really intrigued by it. And during that period of time, high school and then college, I definitely had some issues with anxiety and depression, a lot of low self-worth, and lack of confidence in myself, and even some social anxiety. It felt really useful to study psychology, not necessarily as a way to fix myself, but as a way to kind of understand kind of the struggles that I was having.
Right.
I actually began therapy when I was in college and for several years, and was intrigued by the process, and that led me to want to study it, want to learn more, and then fast forward a few years after college, I went to grad school in San Francisco at the University of San Francisco, got my master's degree in counseling psychology, and then began working in the field, doing training in community mental health agencies, working with kids, teens, adults, couples, families, and was eventually licensed as a marriage and family therapist. And then maybe 10 years after that, I also had the ability to get licensed as a professional clinical counselor, which I also did. And while shortly after getting licensed, I began my practice very slowly, and it grew to the point where I wanted to hire other clinicians. And bringing us to the present day, there are 5 of us working at Pacific CBT. We focused primarily on anxiety disorders, but also mood disorder, relationship issues, life transition concerns, and so yeah, really enjoying continuing with the clinical work, but also enjoying my interaction with my fellow therapists. And I should also note that along the way I did an advanced training in CBT with the Beck Institute, which is a pretty renowned organization founded by Aaron Beck and his daughter Judy Beck, and did an intensive 1-year training with them, which is where I drank the Kool-Aid for the first time, and just really completely with traditional CBT, but also incorporating some DBT and some ACT principles in our work.
Would you say your interest in CBT potentially stemmed from like that sort of style of therapy being useful to yourself, being someone who had anxiety and these sorts of things earlier on?
Interestingly enough, my very first therapist when I was in college was a pretty traditional psychoanalytic therapist, and I actually found that work to be quite useful, but also very frustrating, mainly because I felt that I wanted tools, I wanted to make behavioral changes, and that the type of therapy that psychologist provided was not a modern form of psychoanalytic therapy. So I felt like I was lacking something, and so I eventually found my way to CBT, and it really resonates with my personality in terms of kind of wanting result, wanting to see that the work that I'm doing with my client is helping them and helping them make some changes, and seeing that the quality of their lives are improving as a result of
in a relatively short period of time. I assume you guys follow the practice of like, I'm trying to make you your own therapist so that you don't need to be here, sort of thing.
Exactly. We actually operate within an 8-session model, meaning that at 8-session intervals, we'll take a pause with our clients and reevaluate their goals and the progress towards those goals. The goals are established between the first and the second session. And at 8-session intervals, we use both biometrics and outcome measures to see how they're doing towards their goals, but also getting their self-report of like, yeah, I feel like this particular goal of making 2 new friends, I'm well on the way of that, but not quite 100% there. And so then at that point, we decide with the client on how to proceed. Should we continue at the same pace? Should we decrease the frequency, take a pause? And then we'll likely commit to another 8 sessions. So we do that as a practice at 8 sessions, within the 8-session kind of time limit.
So one thing I wanted to go back to, just because I have personal interest and I can kind of relate to it, is you coming from, or your parents being from Italy, you being born here. I know in lots of cultures there's stigma against mental health and just talking about that sort of thing and feelings in general. And I know in Italian culture, my wife's Italian, that also plays a part. I'm curious, like, what did the people around you think when you started like gaining an interest in psychology? Like, did you talk about, yourself with people, or was that something you had to keep more private? Just curious to hear about that.
Sure. Well, my mom was a legal secretary, and she was really pushing for me to become a lawyer or a CPA. So I think, very kind of pragmatic. So she didn't overtly say that she wasn't pleased, but I think she would have preferred that I go into something that was not quite as theoretical, something that might be a little
like a soft science or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you felt like you were able to kind of follow your passion, whatever it ends up being. Of course, you have like signals from parents one direction or the other, but at the end of the day, you felt like comfortable in following what you care about.
Exactly. They weren't that, they gave me enough freedom to make the choices that I did. And in fact, I have a younger brother. He also studied psychology in college. So
started the trend,
I guess. Yeah. He's not in psychology at all now. He's in the business world. But yeah, I mean, there was some freedom to make choices. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to shift gears a little bit. I saw you had an individual private practice for 11 years before you moved into starting a group practice. One thing I've heard a lot just working with clinicians is they don't get that training in school and maybe not the confidence to like go out and start your own thing. I'm curious what gave you the confidence to go into your first private practice, and then feels like you did that for a good amount of time, and then what got you over the hump to wanting to build a team and make it a larger scale operation?
It's a great question. The community that I was a part of shortly after getting licensed was in private practice, so that felt like the natural way to go. There not many of my colleagues or friends were doing community or agency therapy.
Who was your community? If you say your community, like what was that group of people?
Yeah, well, initially it was the interns and associates that I went to grad school with and then worked with in the agencies during the training period. It just felt like this is what you did. You went into private practice. And then shortly after starting my private practice, my solo practice, is when I got involved in the Beck Institute. And I think everyone that I became friends with and colleagues with were in solo practice. So felt like it was the way to have kind of independence over your work, being able to really set your hour and really kind of watch the practice sort of flourish and thrive. I found that really interesting, and at the time it felt initially a little financially precarious, because if the phone stops ringing, there's worry about am I going to have enough money to pay my mortgage, but that over time that sort of no longer became a concern, and eventually I was approached by a few younger therapists asking for if I would be their supervisor in a private practice, and so it kind of happened. Not so much with a plan, it just sort of fell together organically. And I enjoyed supervising, I enjoyed working on setting up processes, I enjoy the marketing element of growing the practice through using Google AdWords initially and developing the website and using social media. And so enjoyed learning about that, and so it kind of over a few years it really developed to the point of my not being able to see all of the clients that were wanting to work with me, and the natural next step for me was to hire other therapists who could share the same ideas that I had in terms of how to do therapy. And so I hired my first therapist, I think it was around 2017, 2018. And then that therapist started part-time, and she filled up quickly. And then within the next year, I hired two therapists. And a year after that, I hired yet another therapist. So at the moment, there are a total of 5 of us. 2 of us are full-time, and by full-time I mean that we see usually 15 or more clients per week. And then the other 3 are involved in other work outside of ours, and they see somewhere between 12 to 15 clients per week.
Okay, so it sounds like it kind of went from becoming supervisor to a few younger clinicians, and then from there it kind of transitioned into group practice, and then from there, kind of as the client load increased and you guys couldn't handle it anymore, you're like, this needs to be a bigger operation.
Yeah.
That sound right?
Exactly. I should say that at that point when I hired the first licensed therapist, I got involved with an informal group of other therapists in the area who were at the same phase of developing a group practice. We met weekly for about a little over a year, and that group was extremely helpful in terms of both the support that I got from them and I gave to them, but also kind of an opportunity to get resources to figure out like what's the best way to get a virtual assistant, or which is the best workers' comp insurance company to go with. So practical, but also very supportive group of other therapists, and we set goals for ourselves, and we kind of held ourselves accountable with the help of the group members. That was extremely helpful.
There's 5 of you now, and obviously your group is geared towards cognitive behavioral therapy or evidence-based therapy. So when you're looking for a new clinician to join your group, or when you're hiring, what qualities do you look for in a therapist that would make them a good match for Pacific CBT?
First and foremost, they have to have good skill, good relatability, the ability to make clients feel safe and feel welcome and comfortable. So they have to have kind of a warmth. We hope most therapists will have. So I definitely look for that is, how much is this clinician going to be able to really kind of connect with their client? That's super important. Also, I want to kind of assess their clinical judgment. I want to determine if they're going to be both legal and ethical, and how their assessment skills are. Will they be able to handle crises? Will they be able to handle clients? So I'm really interested to see how grounded they are and their ability to make good, sound decisions. If they possess those 2 qualities, I feel like that's the baseline. And beyond that, I'm looking to see that they're open and willing and wanting to learn about CBT and other evidence-based therapy. I feel a real strong need to deliver to the consumers what we advertise. So our name is Pacific CBT, and I really do not want a client to come to us expecting that they'll get CBT and then get a watered down version or so I really, they don't have to be CBT master clinician, but that willingness to learn, willingness to incorporate, and really the hunger to become and identify as a CBT therapist.
Right. And yeah, I think that's one thing that makes Pacific CBT pretty unique from other groups that I've talked to or experienced is that, it's in the name itself, Pacific CBT. So I assume you're attracting a specific type of clientele that's looking for something specific. So it sounds like to be a good fit at your organization, that's really what you're looking for. Somebody that either has previous experience in CBT and evidence-based therapies, or they want to move in that direction and they want that to be kind of their thing. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes, that's accurate. I find that, and I've interviewed a number of prospective staff, clinicians, and it seems that everyone has some familiarity with CBT, and imagine that it's part of the curriculum for most graduate training. So most therapists have familiarity with it. In order to be a good fit for us, that sort of basic familiarity is not quite enough. We want somebody that is really willing to dig in deeper, take more trainings that we offer both internally, but also we support clinicians getting outside training, support them both financially, but also, kind of that's part of the tenets of our practice is we really value continuing education. So.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Given you guys are a CBT evidence-based therapy shop, I'm curious what a week in the life of a clinician at Pacific CBT looks like. And also along those lines, I'm wondering, does the fact that it's CBT or type of therapy that you guys do impact whether you do in-person versus remote? And what's Pacific CBT's current status on in-person versus remote?
Sure. It's really up to the clinician, their level of comfort. So of the 5 of us, 3 of us will do some in-office, in-person therapy sessions, taking, of course, the precautions that we've all learned to is part of our lives now. 2 of our therapists are very content with working from their homes and only do telehealth or remote therapy. It really is up to the therapist and office availability. About the middle of the pandemic, we had 2 offices, and I'm going to take that back. We had 3 offices. One of our clinicians was working out of an office in Oakland, and then we had 2 offices in San Francisco. We've cut that back to just 1 office in San Francisco, and we juggle the office time based on what the therapist's needs are and when they're available for seeing client in person. So far it's working out okay.
From a client perspective, are you seeing any trends in what they want? Does the average client at Pacific CBT want to do fully remote, or do they want to come in?
It's really, there's no pull towards one or the other. It feels like some people that want to come in definitely want to come in, and that's what they're looking for. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be for not having privacy in their homes or their workspace. Others just find the value of being in person to be what they want to invest in. But then there are some clients that we've only ever seen by remote and are quite content with doing video. I think that the evidence is still out in terms of empirical studies to evaluate the effectiveness of in-person versus video, but from my anecdotal experience, they're both effective, and we've learned to adapt doing therapy using technology. In some ways it can be equally as good, and in some cases even better.
Wow, very cool. How important is community to you at Pacific CBT, and how do you balance that now that the world is hybrid typically? It sounds like your clinicians are pretty independent, but I'm sure there's some component of getting together, regrouping. How do you guys handle that?
Yeah, so it's very important to me that we have connection. Doing this work can be very isolating, especially if we're doing it from home. I meet individually with each therapist from 2 times a week for the associate that I working with to every other week for the licensed clinicians. But I'm available to them for consultation weekly if that's something that they wish to have. And then we have quarterly staff meetings that are done by video, and so we stay connected in that way. Inevitably, there's therapists that might share a client where one might see the couple and another might see one of the individuals, and they'll collaborate, or wanting to get resources from another therapist, so they communicate quite easily on their own. And so I'd say it's community is important, and I try to determine what is going to be doable for the therapist, but I do quarterly staff meetings. And occasionally we'll do some trainings together. We've hired, experts in a particular area, and they've done video trainings with us, live video trainings. Some of our clinicians are in a consultation group together that I've formed, where I bring in a CBT expert and they consult with that person twice a month.
Sounds like you have a variety of ways for clinicians to get together to get support, both from each other, and then from you, and then also from sometimes specialists in cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes. And we
Awesome.
haven't done it lately, but I'd like to do more kind of outside of work get-togethers. That sort of fell to the wayside over the last 2.5 years, but I think it's something that we'd like to start doing again.
Cool. So kind of wrapping up a little bit, I had one more question I wanted to dig into, which is, there's therapists everywhere looking for jobs, looking for their first job, their 10th job, whatever it is. So if they're looking at Pacific CBT, if you had to choose one thing that makes it unique from other group practices or other just jobs in general, what would be the one thing that you kind of point to and are proud of with Pacific CBT?
I think that's an easy question to answer by thinking about what our mission is, which is to provide high quality cognitive behavioral therapy. So our commitment to evidence-based therapy, and also our commitment to ongoing learning and support around that learning. So I think those are two things that set us apart from some other group practices.
It really comes through just talking about the services you guys offer, and it's clear there's a real passion for cognitive behavioral therapy or just evidence-based in general. I did want to ask, where are you at today with Pacific CBT? Are you hiring currently? What's next for Pacific CBT in your head?
Yes, we're looking for one additional therapist, a preference to a licensed therapist. And the initial expectation is a part-time, being willing to see somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 clients per week. And if once the ramp up to getting that caseload is achieved, if the prospective clinician wants to add additional hours, given the referrals that we get, definitely be open to having that part-time position turn into full-time. Of course, there's no expectations of that, but if the referrals to support somebody wanting to shift to full-time, we'd be open to that as well.
And is it safe to assume you prefer people with experience in cognitive behavioral therapy, but you're also open to those who are passionate to learn about it?
Absolutely. My experience has been that having some familiarity is great, but the willingness is more important, because we'll provide some pretty strong training through the Beck Institute, as well as regular consultation with me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, John. This was great. Appreciate catching up with you and hearing about what you've done with Pacific CBT. If somebody wants to learn more about Pacific CBT or contact you directly, is there something you want to shout out for them?
Sure. You can email me at john@pacificcbt.com, or you can call me at 415-689-4131.
Heard it here first.
And I want to thank you for inviting me. This project sounds super interesting. As a group practice owner, finding quality members is so challenging, and that you're providing a service to help facilitate that is really, there's a need, and I'm glad you're trying to achieve that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, and hope to have you on again in the future.
My pleasure.